Good afternoon and welcome to another In Conversation with myself, Paul Salahuddin Armstrong. Good morning and good evening to people elsewhere. I know that it is evening in the UK, so I don't know why I said that. Today we're welcoming Michael Pautsch from the Debate London. Welcome, Michael. It's good to have you with us. You're the founder of Debate London, one of London's largest debate training platforms for adults. And through your work, you've helped hundreds of people develop their debating, communication, and leadership skills. But before we get into Debate London and your other projects, I'd like to begin with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background before you got involved in debating?
Absolutely, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me the space. My background is quite a fun one. So I'm Southwest London born and raised. Went to kind of social housing, went to state school. But I've always been quite argumentative, I think is the polite way of calling it. And the I think kind of growing up, I got to see both sides of kind of everything going on. So I kind of came through quite a working class upbringing. My dad was a painter and decorator, so I spent a lot of time building sites, and that gives you a lot of rapport and getting used to having quite a lot of banters back and forth. And then ended up going to Queen Mary University and got exposed to like just a whole kind of wide different range of people and engaging them on many different levels. I would say that in terms of my background, then more professionally, I moved into, I think like many people, I didn't follow my career path that the uni kind of promised me. I did physics at uni. I left that pretty quickly once I
a lot of
realized
people these days.
So I ended up going into kind of sales and communication training. I've been running kind of public speaking training for about 10 years now. And I found that I've always got on with people more and engaging people engage people in their passions, their interests I found has been more interesting and a bigger source of joy for me, and kind of helping them through that. So it's just naturally evolved over time into becoming a community that I kind of have built to bring people around to just do that together. So that's a bit my background, kind of where I'm from, and I guess the rolling boulder to where I am today.
So when did you first discover the world of sort of professional debating?
I discovered it while I was at uni. I didn't discover it through my university. I had an interesting set of events happen on campus. So I was at campus as a lot of the culture wars kind of really kicked off in the mid 2010s, and university campus actually became quite a toxic space for a lot of different discussions. And I found a group that was run by my now mentor Tony, who ran something called the Great Debaters Club. And so I ended up joining that and kind of becoming a part of a member of that organization. And I was there for a good kind of 5-6 years. Their style of debate was very similar to what we do at Debate London, which is it's not about the competitiveness of it necessarily, as much as there's adversarial and the audience is going to vote. But it was much more about building the skills, kind of learning, getting involved, and just engaging and kind of making the best arguments you can, whether you believe in them or not, to try and understand what someone who doesn't agree with you thinks and what their position is, and be able to actually tackle that properly. So I kind of got involved in that, started coaching a bit through him as more of a public speaking coach. And then over COVID, that just didn't make it through the lockdowns. So I thought, I put my bag on, I'll get out there. I think I could do it. It's a community that meant a lot to me. And I'm really happy that they all came back after lockdown. I think they realized it's really important to have a space to disagree and talk about
ideas. So is that when you went to create your Debate London as a follow-up?
Yeah. So without him, Debate London wouldn't exist, because it was I'd always been involved in like coaching the skills, but I'd never thought to really fully connect it to like a space where you could get up and do it. And I find that what I learned from him was that the debate is like the perfect space to do that, because you get a chance to really explore someone else. Like you get to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which is really important. And kind of go, well, what do they believe? Why do they believe it? How can I best represent what they think and feel? And then you get to do that. You get to practice communicating and presenting that in the best way you can. And then afterwards, you can reveal, actually, I don't agree with it, or I do agree with it, and then talk to a bunch of people and meet. It gets just meet like a plethora of different individuals, and through that, I think it just creates like, just a really wholesome space. But yeah, but I learned all that from him, and it's just something that's stuck with me since.
Mm. I'll probably get more into that in a bit about actually taking on an argument that you don't agree with, but I'll do that later. I think one of the important things, it's learning how to disagree with people, and in a civil manner, rather than getting into, because even people hear the word debate and sometimes they think like, oh, they're going to have like a fierce argument.
Yeah.
Whereas it doesn't necessarily, it can mean that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And even if it means that, if it's a debate in a proper debating space, it will still be civil, even if it's passionate. But what does learning to debate actually teach us beyond becoming better at winning arguments?
So I would say there are two halves of this. So I'll go over the collaborative side. So this is moving away from just winning arguments. It teaches you how to listen effectively. It's a big part of debating is actually listening and understanding what someone is telling you with their time. So you could be at work and someone they might be beating around the bush and they could be telling you they're burnt out. And you as their manager or as their colleague, how can you best like listen to them and understand that and take on the key points and then actually respond to them in a helpful way that's going to maybe help them come to terms or to make a better decision. So I think that you get that part of it, which is a very collaborative side of debating, which is that active listening skill. And through debate specifically, you get that under pressure. And that, I think, is just an incredibly useful thing to have. But the second part is also personal clarity. When I then have to think on my feet, listen to what you said, respond, and then give you something back, I have to do that in a way that is relevant to what you've said. I have to do it in a way that's going to add to the conversation and is going to be beneficial. And is going to either advance my case as something that I believe in or help you with the thing that you say that you care about. And debating is just a mechanism to practice all of that start to finish. And doing that live. The other way that you can think about it,
you would say it's really about developing one's communication skills and also active listening skills.
Absolutely. I describe debate as the final boss of public speaking because it's public speaking. You can start, if you watch a TED talk, they'll have a script, they'll have prepped it, they will stand up and they'll just talk. But if you're in a meeting or if you're talking to your friends, I guarantee you, if you're talking, they're going to ask you questions, they're going to say, I don't agree, or they're going to follow up. And what debating, it's the ability to kind of, what do I think? Say it, listen, get information back, and then process that and respond on the fly. I do a lot of training around interview skills. So you'll go to a job interview because that's a really good example of what does it look like in day to day. Someone is asking you questions, they're asking you for examples there. But if you break down an interview, it's just a conversation between two people, same as we're talking here and now. You're going to ask me a question, you're going to kind of give me some ideas. I have to understand that and then come back at you with something that is going to be interesting and hopefully a bit fun for everyone listening at home. Hopefully. But that is what debate is. That is the act of practicing debate. And that's what we aim to give everyone that comes through our doors.
I think, especially listening skills as well. This is something which it's in short supply these days. There's a lot of conversations that I've had over the years, and I've heard like the other person, and I've said something, and then the way they respond, they clearly haven't heard anything of what I said or tried to understand. They've just come back with literally the same thing that they already said.
Yep.
But they've maybe worded it slightly different. Sometimes they don't even bother wording it slightly different. And it's just like, that's not a conversation.
Yep. It's especially if you're having it online. Like it's just, I think people have gotten used to having their position, and their position is being validated by people around them, or it could be being validated by like their choice of news source. It could be like their social media kind of like landscape. And then when you face someone that has a genuinely different view, that can be hard to process if you haven't engaged with like that as a thing. So I can give you a personal example from me. So over lockdown, I had to isolate quite a bit because when I caught COVID at one point, and so I did like a 2-week isolation. And I I came out of that a very stubborn, really kind of like rock-headed person who found it really hard to disagree because I spent 2 weeks talking to myself, and I get along swimmingly with me. Um, but other people, not so much. So I then had to relearn that people, I know people have different experiences and views and opinions, and go back through that process like I was a 3-year-old. And I think a lot of people have that same thing. It's just that it's baked over a lot of time, and often on kind of issues that they're very passionate about. So that emotional element gets in there too.
Yeah, especially when passion gets involved. Yeah, definitely. And this is one of the reasons why within our tradition we're taught to be careful of anger, because once you get angry, it clouds the judgment. So yeah, very much in line with debating, I guess, as well.
It is. There's a really important skill that I think we actually teach this in our workshops, and it's a way to kind of help keep that anger away. But there's a very particular type of anger that comes up, which is, are you angry at what the person's saying, or are you angry because you feel like they're not listening to you, or you feel like you're not being understood? And that creates frustration. And so the whole thing bubbles up and becomes an argument when it didn't need to be, if the person just felt listened to. And we get this quite a lot, which is people are taught active listening, and they got active listening is just going, is nodding and going, But really, what you're doing is performing the active listening. You're just performative. But if you then start responding to what they've said, and it's got nothing to do with what they've just spoken about, or
Yeah, exactly.
you've ignored them, then you haven't
Actions
listened to
prove the
them.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes that person get really upset. So
Mm.
we do a series of exercises where we get people to actually summarize what someone has said accurately, and that person has to agree that they've summarized it accurately before they're allowed to then continue. And once you've done that a few times, it just helps you get more accurate and more in line with what does listening actually feel like, instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. Because it's a really important difference between someone who's waiting to talk and someone who's listening, thinks, and engages.
It's interesting you say that. I've had conversations with people before, and when they've responded in that way, I've literally stopped where I am, and I've asked them. I said, "What did I just say?
Yeah.
Did you understand what I said?" Because often, if they did, it actually uh, either they have nothing to say, or what they would say would be very different. It wouldn't be what
Hmm.
you know.
So,
Um,
sometimes it's also bias. So sometimes it can also be. So let's say you're having a political conversation. I think that's a good example of this. And you come up with point A, and they might have a response to point A with their own point, but that's nestled in a lot of bias and a lot of assumptions are being made when they make
mm,
that. And so they are actually responding to what you've said, but they've not explained A plus B gets you to C. They've just assumed that you already understand C and they're going with it. And so they're almost asking you to take a bit of a leap to get where they are. So just getting them to slow down and explain, look, you said this, and you just explain how we get from here to here, because I've missed that bit. Um, because that is also something that happens quite a lot if you're dealing with people that aren't used to having that like a rough back and forth.
bias is an immense issue, and people that, especially in the political arena, people tend to pick up slogans, and
Hmm.
they get involved in things, and they repeat those slogans or variations of those slogans, but then they don't really understand the root of what they're all
Hmm.
discussing about. It can be quite comical, actually, sometimes when you look on this situation, especially if you've got two groups that are slogan based and they're attacking each other, and you're like, neither of you guys really understand the whole thing. And if you actually took a step back and analyzed it, you might not agree, but you wouldn't be as disagreeing with each other as passionately as you are.
It's funnier as well when sometimes a lot of their goals overlap, and
Mm.
so it's like there's like a top line issue they disagree on, but a bunch they do. But the slogan is just on one area. So instead of going, well, we care about all of these things, let's kind of come together and deal with this, and then we'll deal with the rest of it later. And they just kind of stand there going, "Meh, not my friend," at each other for a good old while.
No, I did some work some years ago with people from, you remember the EDL?
Hmm.
They've disappeared now, but at the time they were quite a big thing. And I sat with some of them, and I also sat with some Muslims that were a bit more radical in their views and very anti the EDL guys. And I asked them like what was bothering them, what the issues were,
Mm.
and got them to like list it out. And it turns out a lot of the concerns overlapped. And they were concerned about the same things, like they didn't have, they come from, in many cases, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, were not getting opportunities, didn't feel there was investment in their areas.
Hmm.
And then there was concerns, obviously, about young women and things like this. But there was actually an immense amount of common ground, but they
Hmm.
just were not seeing it because, people get programmed by propaganda, and then they tend to reflect that rather than actually looking for solutions. And of course,
It's
we're not going to move forward unless we look for those solutions.
it's one of the things that I find really interesting. So we it's not a, there's a podcast called Dare to Disagree, which my mentor Tony and a close friend of ours, the late Joanna Maraki, did, called Dare to Disagree, and it's we host it on our website, but it's basically talking to senior individuals and how they've used disagreement to kind of get through their careers. But there's a really fun episode which with two of our coaches called Heather and Jordan, who are they're in a relationship, but they're vehemently opposed politically. They have very different political opinions, and that, with one being very left wing, one being quite right wing, and so you'd imagine that that wouldn't work, but actually, because they've kind of come to realize that the person in front of them, they believe like their beliefs are in their mind making the world better. They're like, I want to achieve this like end of this world, not end of the world, so this utopic world or this vision, which I think is better for everyone. And once you start assuming the person isn't bad, they're actually out for good, it takes all of that hatred away. It takes, so even if we disagree how we get there, we both want to get to the same kind of place, which people are happy, they're thriving. And I think you get that in a lot more once people take a step back from like their slogans or the sound
Yeah.
bites.
No, I definitely think that's true of a lot of people, regardless whichever religious, political, or ideological perspectives that they hold.
Mm.
Uh, Even they might be diametrically opposed to each other, but they're both trying to achieve a better world. And you see this, I mean, on left and right. The left often thinks like the state should take care of more things to regulate society and make it better that way. Whereas the right believes that you can do that through free enterprise and the markets,
Hmm.
and giving people their freedom. And that incentivizes people to do that. And of
Hmm.
course, who is right and who is wrong is the constant argument. We're all going to occupy positions along that spectrum somewhere.
Mm.
But as to which works better or not, and who is ultimately right or wrong, I mean, you can make strong arguments both ways. And there are examples of more socialist or more sort of capitalist free market societies that have been relatively successful.
Hmm.
It's not like this just one model works.
Yeah, I think it's on a. I don't think one answer is correct all the time. So I remember when I was younger. I don't know if you ever watched like a load like Jordan Peterson stuff.
Yeah,
But when he did like a lecture that I remember watching when I was a kid. I say kid, when I was at uni. But he talks about this idea that, imagine you're on a road like with sheer cliffs on either side, um, and you're walking in a straight line, but underneath you the ground's doing this, right? And you kind of have either more left wing or right wing policies, and that will pull the road. And so sometimes you'll need left wing policies to pull things back so you can keep walking straight. Sometimes it might go too far and it goes the other way. And I think a lot of people get stuck in this idea that, oh, I identify as right wing, therefore the right wing answer is always correct, or I identify as left wing, therefore the left wing answer is always
yeah.
correct. And actually, no, sometimes the answer is you should be giving people more like opportunity or more freedom. You should, sometimes you do need to raise like a tax, or you do need to bring in regulation. But it's a very much it's why politics has debates. It's why politics has discussions. People might not like where some of that's gone over the last 10 years in the UK, but you know,
Yeah.
ideally that's how it's supposed to work.
True. One fascinating aspect of debating is also when you have one of these debates organized and you ask a person to defend a position which they don't personally hold.
Mhm.
Uh, what does that do to the way that we think?
So it does a lot actually, and it's the fastest way to get better at debating. In fact, one of the worst ways to practice debating is to only defend the things that you really believe in. And I can unpack that and explain why. But I'll start with what the act of debating for the other side does. Is one, if you're if you're staunchly opposed to it, let's say like you're really opposed to your position I'm asking you to defend. Well, what that means is that when you're doing the preparation, when you're actually going through what are the arguments that the other side has, you're in your mind arguing against them already in prep. And so you go, well, I think they would say this. Well, I would say this to respond to that. Okay, well, great. Well, then how do we make this argument stronger? How do we kind of preempt this? Or do we need to add anything in? Like, what's the next step? And what you'll find is that you're able to make some incredibly strong arguments, and often even arguments that are stronger than what is in the mainstream for that topic, because you already have the responses there ready to go. You know what the other side's going to say. So you're preparing around that. The second thing that happens is it forces you to really, if you're doing it properly, is really think about why do people believe in this thing? Like, what is the underlying values they have? Because I may not agree with them in this case, but I might share those values in other areas, or maybe I understand these values, but I don't think they're the priority right now. But if I was prioritizing these things, what would happen? The example that I give here quite a lot is we're both old enough to remember this, but do you remember when the contactless cards first released, and like cards first, like you could
Yeah.
first tap them? So there was a really big debate in like British public life, which was, should we ban them because people were having their cards robbed on the tube and stuff because people were just tapping them with like air tap things. And so you had this big like safety group who prioritized safety, going, oh, we should ban it because it's really unsafe. People can just steal your stuff. Then you had the free market and like freedom and the ease of use people going, oh, but it makes the economy move easier. People buy more stuff. It just really easy to use. We should keep it. And that debate raged for a while. They brought in some like extra safeguards, and we've got them today. Both people were telling the truth. Both values were true. And any debate worth having, both sides have got something that's true. They just prioritize different things. So if I can get in the mind of someone who values this other thing, they stop being someone that I don't understand. I now understand this person. I can literally walk in their shoes. If I can then present their arguments very well, I like that's kind of the mindset change that happens. And often you'll find that you pull yourself towards their side as you start to understand it, because you kind of go, actually, these values are important. I might not fully agree with them, but I can understand why it's important for this group. And uh, then when you're actually in the debate, it's just really good like live practice, just to really gives you that on the spot experience. And especially in the Q&A, which is the bit where you're most likely to kind of like break character, you the act of kind of sticking to what you and your team have agreed, because debating is a team, a group effort, and going through those prepared arguments, I find it's a real good way to really sharpen the mind. But most importantly, and this is I think the biggest thing that happens, is remember when I said if you argue for the things you believe in, like that can be problematic. The reason why is, like I was saying before with bias, if you argue for the things you believe in, you don't check yourself at any point during prep. You don't question the arguments you're making because it's following your bias. And so you might give up, like, here are our four arguments, but those four arguments might have in them two or three assumptions, or you might need information to kind of show why they're relevant, or to prove that they're true or important. But you already believe they're important, so you don't give the audience that. You start at C, you don't give them A and B. Whereas if you don't believe in it, you don't believe in it personally, so you have to build it up from the ground, and you have to give them A plus B so that you can land them on C. And training people in that way of structuring their arguments, that way of building their cases, when they then come to defend the thing they truly believe, and that carries over, they are some of the most persuasive people you will ever see, because all of a sudden now they've got natural conviction. They've got really well structured arguments. They're not leaving anyone behind because they haven't explained like why they've got there. They're actually walking them through it. And yeah, so that's kind of the process. That's what happens. That's what I see. And often I'll see people from like within two debates, like go from being, I've never done this before, I'm really nervous, to actually, I'm confident that I can do this now. I've got really good structures. I can give arguing for my side a go because I feel ready to try and just see how it stands up. And then often they'll flop a little bit and they'll make some mistakes, but they then see that and then they keep learning.
It is true. It is good. I kind of learned that in a different space with my children, because I don't want my children to grow up and have bigoted views in one way or another. And I remember one of my daughters a few years ago, she said, "Oh, I think atheists are stupid." What? Where did that come from? And I actually ended up going through a defense of atheism, even though I'm not an atheist. I believe in Allah, and I have quite a strong belief. But the thing was, I don't want to go in out there thinking atheists are stupid.
Mm,
And I know some very intelligent atheists who I've actually benefited from learning from, and also people, I'm not sure whether they're fully atheist or certainly agnostic, people like Carl Sagan, that were really intelligent.
mm,
And, in a way, what I find interesting about this is their atheism, because they didn't believe in what I believe, it gives them a whole different perspective on things that I wouldn't naturally see.
mhm,
I have to challenge myself to see that. But when I read their works or listen to them, I get to see their point of view.
mhm.
And that's useful for me because I can compare and contrast that with what I believe and what I understand. And it actually just it adds to it actually.
Yeah,
It adds a nuance and an understanding that I wouldn't have otherwise. An appreciation for what they've discovered as well.
absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it. Like the ability to see their perspective, understand it, and even if you haven't got to adopt it, but it brings you closer to them because it's not an us and them situation. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it brings you closer to people that you would otherwise disagree with because you understand the values they hold, and ultimately. These are all values that we hold in other areas. We understand they're important. It's why I like to use the safety versus kind of freedom of use argument because all of us believe we should be able to be free in decisions and be able to make choices. But also,
Well,
all of
it's
us
just
believe
like
in
in the case
safety.
of atheists, they tend to be very strong on science, reason, rationalism, things like this, which religious people can be.
Hmm.
Being religious is not, it doesn't mean that you can't be like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of religious people who aren't,
Hmm.
and the very fact that you believe in a God uh, or a deity or deities or something like that, that can undermine reason and rationalism. It doesn't mean it necessarily has to, but it can do if we don't check it. And
Yeah,
these are actually important things that we all need to have. Otherwise, we're not going to make good decisions.
yeah. I think the idea of the moral absolute is something that I quite like. You don't necessarily get that in, like I'd say, atheistic spaces. This idea that something is just objectively wrong,
Mm.
which is interesting because there are things that you can explain away in saying, well, culturally or like for their time, maybe they weren't wrong. But then you kind of go, but was it accepted but still wrong? Like, do you know what I'm saying? So could it
Yeah.
have been? Could people have done it and not been punished by society, but it would have still been like morally wrong, regardless, based on what we feel now? And I think that's so that I do struggle with some conversations about how people that you get into more moral relativism, which is like a separate kind of set of topics. But it's still something that I'm looking to get more information on. A debate we'll probably end up having at some point.
Mind you, on that, I mean, do you think sometimes people get so accustomed to arguing about like sort of caricatures of other people's positions rather than what are their actually the strongest arguments?
Yes. So we call that a straw man. So the idea that so a straw man is kind of giving someone the weakest version of their case, building up the straw individual that you can blow over really easily, and often that happens quite a lot, and it happens especially if what we talked about earlier, if someone's not listening to you, they kind of like vaguely heard what you're saying before, so they stop listening and they have a prepared thing, and then they just launch it. And that thing is meant to deal with like a really vague version of what you've said, that maybe a lot weaker. Pardon me.
Mm.
So um, that's something that we see quite a lot. And once people start to understand how to look for them, we then try to teach people something called a steel man. So a steel man is when, let's say you give me and you are disagreeing, and you give me an argument, and maybe you've given me a fairly weak version of that argument. Instead of me just defeating that, I should help you, and I should say, actually, that's a good argument. And I think the best version of that argument, which you agree is X, is if I add X, Y, Z on, and they go, yes, great. Well, even if that's true, even if we accept these things, here is what my position says, and here's why I think that this is more relevant or more true or more important. And people are far less angry when you do that. Like they're far more willing to accept that actually we disagree, but we're friends because I can understand why, because they don't feel like you just swept them aside. Whereas if you try to belittle what they've said, or you try to take a weak, intentionally take a weaker version because you've heard it like as a soundbite, um, then yeah, it can be very frustrating for a lot of people.
I find that myself. I'm often dealing with people that they have really pathetic arguments, and it's like they're not looking at the real thing. It's very frustrating to deal with, actually. But
Try
it's
stillmanning
very
them.
commonplace. Yeah.
Try giving them a stillman to be like, if they come at you something that's really like, oh, um, give you this statement and it's a bit fairly weak and you feel that you could deal with it quite quickly, just for take a minute to like, you've said this, I understand it like this, is that correct? This makes it even stronger. This is like a much stronger version. Is that what you believe? Yes. And then handle that more advanced
Mm.
version, because then that is actually much more closer to like a friendly dialogue than just a I'm winning or I'm not winning, because they've given you an idea. You've kind of built that idea up and you've developed that together, and they will recognize it's a genuinely stronger position. It will make them feel more clear in what they believe, because they go, yeah, no, this is the stronger version of that thing. And then you can explain why your value system or why what you care about in your view is still the correct one. And they might not agree with you, but they're leaving with a much better kind of
That's
outcome as well.
not a nice approach.
Mm.
On that, also, do you think we're like losing the ability to disagree in like wider society? Because there seems to be people in more echo chambers than what they used to be. I mean, maybe thanks to social media and things like this and the algorithms.
So face to face, no. I think that people actually are quite able to disagree still. The communities that I've built, and maybe it's just the kind of people that come to debating and come to events that we run. Maybe they're primed to be able to have these kind of conversations, but they are generally very open, I think, and people that I meet are able to have those disagreements and are willing to explore new ideas and be challenged. I think that you're right that there is a growing percentage of people, or definitely a growing trend, where people just aren't engaging with, like, it could be echo chambers because they're just online, they're
That's
chronically
what I mean.
online.
It's like people they're not communicating with each other. So it's like, and when they hear something they disagree with, they're more likely to just block or
Yeah.
not engage or not attend those places and meet those people, just because I mean I tend to be the opposite. If I find a group of people I disagree with, I often go and meet them and say, okay, tell me what you believe and let me hear what the full picture, so I
Yeah.
can actually understand where you're coming from.
I
uh,
remember that the first time I met you, we was when we was hosting the debate between we were speaking from the Association of British Muslims and the National Secular Society, on religious circumcision, and that was the first place I met you. And you would come. I remember you saying you come to hear like the full arguments from them. Um, I think that you do get individuals that are like that, and I find that I say this a lot to people. If you are online and you are someone who can disagree with people, don't engage them on social media. So if someone's having a tantrum, if someone's like putting up material or posts, don't engage them publicly, because odds are they're posting not for you, but because there's other people they're trying to impress or they're trying to communicate to. So instead, you might message this person in the DMs. You might privately message them, and this, especially if it's like a friend of yours and maybe they're starting down this path. Well, if they then react very negatively to that, then just walk away and just only talk to this person in face to face. Or they might react positively, and then you can invite them to a face to face conversation. You want to get them off the online space as that's the best way to do it, because especially if you're in public setting, I might say something to you that's a really good point, and you might come back at me with a generic, like straw manified argument. But you're doing that because you're not talking to me. You're getting points from the collective group that believes the thing you're kind of aiming towards. So you're better off just not engaging in those spaces and talking to people in person, because when they're in person, they are fine. Like, people are way better in person.
No, I definitely. I mean, this is one of the reasons I support your work with London Debate, because you actually get people out of the social media and get them into a place, get them talking to each other. I try to do the same in my own work, because when you do that, you see the person. Whereas sometimes, I mean, it's online. Sometimes people are genuine in the way they come across,
Mhm.
but other times they're just being keyboard warriors and they're hiding behind the screen.
Yep.
When you actually see them in person, they're not the same person that they project online.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I used to do door-to-door sales. So I used to like go knocking on doors. I also did like event sales. So I did a lot of charity. So like get people to sign up to charities and donate for like a year, 2 years, that kind of thing. And what was interesting is there would be people that would deal with me as like a nameless, like just a t-shirt with a logo on it, and they could be incredibly rude. And then like we'd be packing up, and then I'd see the same person when I wasn't in like the branded gear, and I'd help them like open the door, or I'd say hi, and then they'd be really nice, but like they were incredibly like but when I'm in the brand, they
Yeah,
just go, oh, insert faceless brand, but not a person, but just insert brand individual, and
yeah,
become and treat you like that. And I think that people have a tendency to do that with viewpoints as well. They go, oh, you're they'll write you off. They'll go, oh, you're right wing or you're left wing. Or I've also seen it. This is what happened to me when I was at uni, when because a lot of identity politics kind of swept across my uni quite quickly in quite a few of the social areas that I was in, and so it became, oh, like, oh, you're white or you're male, or in some cases we had one of the groups I was kind of doing some work with, individuals that were more religious, because of their religious views, were seen to be more conservative, and that might have gone against some of the more LGBT spaces. So they was a bit of like a weird crossover that happened there. Been like, oh, but you're religious, so you must maybe have these views, and it was a lot of assumption. But in the minute you got people talking, it all
yeah.
went away.
There's a lot of assumption in that area, and it's sometimes it's true, but not always. Um, do you think people become less comfortable when hearing views that they find offensive or profoundly wrong?
Yes, I think that people get uncomfortable in two settings. One is when if someone is expressing a view that they are genuinely goes against like their core values, or maybe makes them feel unsafe, they'll feel uncomfortable. But that's at the value level. But you can also get people, and I see this quite a lot as well, where someone might be expressing values that line up, or they might broadly agree on, but the way that they're expressing them might be aggressive, or might include language which not actually signals, but is not acceptable or not accepted, broadly speaking. And both of those have the same effect, which is that the person receiving it can feel uncomfortable or can just turn off from the conversation entirely. The I think the latter of those, um, I think people need to do more work to try to not listen to just how someone's saying it, but what are they actually saying? Because I see this quite a lot when I work with individuals that haven't had as much like academic training, or they're more like rough around the edges, and so the way that they speak and the way that they communicate is quite rough. It is quite maybe more direct, uses words that we might not broadly people might not broadly like, but they've got quite a clear direct thing they're trying to achieve and that they're trying to say, and might be in agreement, but they'll get shut down. And I kind of go, yeah, I can talk to them and I can help them to use better words and to be better presented, absolutely. But at the same time, like, you're an official, like, you might be a counselor, you might be someone who's like a senior in a workplace. You should be trying to listen to this person and understand what is the thing that they are trying to, what is the issue they're trying to raise. Because if that isn't actually a bad problem, like if there's not actually like if they're not being problematic with the issue, that's still an issue that you should be trying to deal with. And then separately, we can help with how they communicate that. And I think people go, well, they've said it this way, therefore, meh. And actually, sorry, I made that sound too much. But when actually they should go, no, they've raised a valid problem in a way that I don't like, but I can still hear the problem. I can still understand that. I can still listen to this person, and I can have a separate conversation with them about how they've come across and how they've said it. And maybe that might have upset me or upset someone, but I can recognize that they've raised a legitimate grievance. And both of those things can be true.
No, this is true. I mean, especially if they're a councillor or an MP, they really should be listening to the concerns of the constituents. But do you think sometimes that people fear that if there's an assumption there that, if they listen respectfully to an argument or perspective that they don't agree with, that they are somehow legitimizing it? Do you think they've confused understanding with agreement?
I don't know. Um, I I think that it, it's a hard one because I think that any debate worth having, and I say this when I say any debate worth having, there's truth on both sides. Like both sides have a claim to truth, or they have a value claim, which is like I'm prioritizing this and you're prioritizing this other thing, and that's what the conversation is. There are some conversations that I think we have broadly agreed are no longer worth having. Then it's like if someone was going to turn around and use a and try to justify, for example, like racism, right? And like just and try to, we would all kind of broadly go, we racism is just bad. I'm not going to engage in this. This is just a thing we're going to walk away from now. Okay, thanks, bye. And at that point, listening to that person, really, you're probably doing that so that you can engage them and talk to them and try to kind of bring them back or kind of have that debate. I don't think that's necessarily legitimizing them, but equally, the uh, on the flip side, when it is a legitimate conversation, what people can often end up getting into is, uh, I think it's more of this idea that they don't want to be challenged, or there is a fear that, like you could say, if I listen, other people might listen, that they might grow a platform, it might get bigger. And I think some people look at it in that lens. So a lot of people who view the world for like just pure power dynamics, and it's just power and there's nothing else, then a lot of them will be like, if I'm giving you my attention, if I'm giving you my time, if I'm listening to this, that's giving you power, it's giving you a greater voice, giving you more views, the algorithm will let it roll, more people might come and listen because you now have viewers. So they just try to shut it down, and that will be because they'll view you having that platform as a power thing that you were getting.
And related to that as well, have you ever hosted a debate where you thought, I'm not comfortable with the arguments being made, but nevertheless that you believed that it was important that they were allowed to make that?
Yes, I have. I've hosted some debates on, we did one about how groups get prescribed in the UK, after um, Palestine Action got prescribed as a terrorist organization. So we just did a debate on like, what is the mechanism? What does that look like in the UK? And one of the people that was speaking in that, um, said some things that I kind of went, oh, it's going a bit far. But the again, that came very much firmly in the camp of like they had a valid point about challenging how the system works, but I didn't like the how they said it. Made me kind of go, that's a bit risky. Like that made me feel a little bit But once I kind of got over myself and actually listened to what they were saying, they were fundamentally challenging. Here are the step-by-step processes. Here's what's happened. Do we think that these are fair processes as a whole? Um, and that was an interesting thing then to kind of unpack. But in the moment, I was, yeah, um, yeah, I was like, oh, they're being really harsh on the government here, and they're like, they're using some words that I wouldn't normally use, like fascist. I'm like, I don't like when that word's used. But
You tend to find that in these sort of venues as well. Sometimes people use words that they just throw out there, not necessarily how the word is strictly defined, but they will throw it out there. So ammunition, isn't it, in some debates? But also from the audience as well, when they ask questions, sometimes they just throw things that are, yeah.
Yeah, it happens because it's a way to signal as well. If you use certain keywords, because a big part of winning people over, so logic just proves whether or not like you should or could or won't work, right? That's what logic does. What emotion does is it's the emotional part that inspires action. So if I convince you that there is a problem, you're going to call that a problem. But then if I don't make you sad or upset or angry about that problem, why are you going to be motivated to change it? And then equally, if I then give you a solution and they go, but this is a solution and it's going to make everything lovely, great. Well, that's just a solution. But if I don't make you happy or interested or like really feel positively about like how we can get there and what the next steps look like, what is it that pulls you towards that solution? And so emotion can be just as big a part of convincing someone as the logic behind what they're saying. And Some people lean really far into the emotion, and they'll lose all logic, and they'll just go, I'm gonna make people feel angry, or make people feel sad, or make people feel really happy, to just, because that will just inspire movement. That's what that would do. But that movement will be kind of lost and disparate because it's not clear what they're trying to achieve. Or you get people that are really, really logical, and they'll write articles, and they'll have the most amazing explanations of like why this is the problem, why we need to fix it, how we can fix it, and examples of how we fixed it in the past, and they've all worked. But they do it in a very clinical way that leaves you kind of going, oh, someone should get around to doing that, and then you put it down, and you crack on with your life. So that blend is needed.
I think that's a very valid point to make. And also, this is the importance why people have those spaces where they can have those debates and discussions in public, and hear different perspectives that they wouldn't normally entertain. And this is where obviously free speech comes into this. And, you know, thank goodness in this country we still have that. There are many places around the world where people wouldn't be able to have these debates. And I think that's a sad thing, because it does. I mean, if we don't discuss these issues, how can we make any headway on them?
No, I agree. I think especially, I think what we're seeing in the UK, and this, I'm going to talk about something very much more localized here, is just, I think we're seeing a lot of communities that aren't necessarily talking to each other, and I mean internally. So I think even where I live now, there are lots of like little kind of growing problems. And where I grew up, I knew my neighbors, I knew people on the street, we'd play outside on the road. But here, I know, I think I know the people across the road from me, I know the people that live upstairs, and I know the people who live next door to me, because we had like some like shared issues that we had to deal with. But I don't know many people then on my street. But then there are things that will affect the street. Whereas my wife, she's on like the road WhatsApp, so she knows more people, and she like talks to more people when there's events, and they share items. But where my parents are, we know a lot more people. Well, I know a lot more people, because it's just a community that talks a lot more. They're getting more engaged. I probably should talk to more people. I've become depressingly antisocial as I've got older. But I think that's something that we're seeing across a lot of communities, where they're just not really engaging. They're not sharing on those issues. They're not like even just sharing a cup of tea with someone. It breaks down those barriers, makes you don't feel alone. People are facing the same issues as you. We can fix those issues together and make life around us better. It's something that you then see from that.
That's certainly true, yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, because obviously I'm hosting this podcast series called In Conversation, rather than a debating program. So I'm particularly interested in the distinction that you would make between debate and dialogue, because obviously we're having a dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really debating here, or are we? I don't know. You know, you tell me.
So debating is just a mechanism. That's all it is. So right now we're having obviously a dialogue conversation. In a debate, what happens is someone's given a position, right? And they have to say either why this is good or why it's bad. And that's kind of their job. So debating itself can be a bit more adversarial, because it can, in terms of like the act of like with the rules, there's a bit more win and lose. Have you convinced people? Have you not? I think that you can. So that's the idea of, you get like a competitive side of debating, which is that people vote, you gain votes, you lose votes. Have you changed people's minds? And you're given fairly strict positions, which is you're on the team that agrees with this, and you're on the team that doesn't agree with this. Right, go. And I think we can all agree that in real life, sometimes and often, the answer is somewhere in the middle of two positions. So debates kind of, you get a lot of that. What I would say though, and this is something that again I've learned from Tony, which is, if you're a good debater, it's not because you're like just this distinctly persuasive person. If you're talking about like public debates, so like not competition debating is different. There's a judge, they're listening to you, they're grading you, it's a whole thing. What we teach, I call it collaborative debating. And it's specifically about, how do I not just convince someone that I'm right? Because if all I'm doing is convincing you that I'm right, that's what I'm spending my time doing. We've all got someone like that in the office, and we don't like working with them, right? We all know that person. Yep. So collaborative debating is about, how can I convince someone that the thing that I'm saying is the right idea, is a good idea, and do it in a way that brings them with me, so they want to join me in doing that, right? They want to come along. And so that could be your proposal in the meeting room. It could be suggesting where to go for lunch. It could be anything. But like, if I've got an idea, I don't want you just to go, yeah, you're right, Michael, leave me alone. But yeah, you're right, let's go do it. And that's where the idea of like winning votes comes in. So that's what we teach specifically. And that I think is much closer to dialogue, because the way that you achieve that is by informing your audience, by talking to them like responsible people and giving them the best information you can for them to make the decision. They might decide against you, but even if they decide against you, you have still won, because they're making that decision with the best information possible, right? Which is ultimately, that is like the goal outcome of someone who is good at these skill sets. So you kind of, that's like the two spectrums of the debate, and you've got this like highly competitive side where it's like we're out for blood and it's really good fun and we're going to go back and forth, and it's like, it's like the love of the game basically. And then you've got the other side, which is the bit that which is what we actively teach, even if we do have elements of the more kind of competitive side, which is just, I'm going to convince you, but you're going to come with me on this journey. You're going to agree or disagree. You will make the best decision you possibly can after we've spoken. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Uh,
I tend to get asked this as well, why sometimes I have engaged in debates or even like meetings and conversations with people that I know are like diametrically opposed to, and they're saying, why are you even sitting with these people? They are blah, 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 you know? And I'm like, well, if I'm not talking to them, who is talking to them? If
yeah.
they, if no, I mean, the very fact that I can have a conversation with them or a debate or a discussion or any kind of communication like that has got to surely be a good thing. And
Yeah.
if that is not present, then who are they talking to? Where are they getting that information from? What are they thinking of us? You know, and I think this is something that many people miss when they just want to, you know, shut people down and they don't want to engage with them at all. Because it doesn't mean those people go away; they just go somewhere else.
Absolutely. And I think this is something that I think about quite a lot, which is when I deal with people who their natural instinct is to kind of just leave a space, I kind of go, but you have your beliefs and you want to spread your beliefs. You want people to agree with you. But if you're only speaking to people who already agree with you, you're not helping yourself. Like you have to go to where people disagree with you to win more people over, right? You can't win someone over if they're already on your side. They're already there. So the
Yeah.
so I find it quite funny then when people go, "Oh no, I don't talk to these people because I
You know, if you
disagree
do
with them."
that, you might actually lose them because they get fed up with you.
Yeah, all that they get sick of your face every week at the same coming to the same debate club. No, but the but no, you're absolutely true. And I think of I believe his name is Daryl Davies. I might be getting the name wrong. But he did an interview years ago in like the on the Joe Rogan podcast, because he actually became famous because he converted, or he convinced a bunch of people to leave the Ku Klux Klan, and he's a black gentleman. And the way that he did that was he just went and met them and spoke with them, and he was like, and his reasoning was, they probably haven't met anyone like me. They've probably got into this because of community or other things. And if we just go and have a chat and a conversation, they'll probably realize that a lot of the other stuff that comes with this thing isn't true, and they won't put their lives into it anymore. And he convinced, like, I think, I can't remember the number, but it was a lot of them. He got them to leave, but he had to go to where people disagree with him. He had to go to the space where, in this case, they actively hated him, and by being in that space, he changed a lot of minds. But if he had never done that, those people would have never changed their minds. And I think about that quite a lot when I meet people who are really passionate, but like they're really passionate behind a closed door. I'm like, if you just went and spoke to people and like showed them how passionate you are and spoke to them in the genuine way that you do when you're talking to me, you'd be surprised how many people you would convince, or if not convince them, that they would understand you and you would get along so much better. Because right now, you're just someone from afar, and that's part of the
Well,
problem.
quite, and also, I mean, I remember there was a debate that I attended, and it was really stacked up against us. You know, so the people in the room were obviously going to vote the other way. And people asked me, they says, "Well, you lost the debate." And it's like, no, actually, the very fact that we were there, that we had a presence, and they listened to us, we won. We won
Hmm.
something that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And at least they could see, you know, we're human beings, we're not monsters, you know. And that's the tendency that people do. They make a caricature of the people they disagree with. And when they actually see that they're human, that they have similar perspectives on other things, maybe not on that particular thing, but in other respects, they see the humanity of them. And I think this is why it's really important to bring these people into spaces where they can have those debates and dialogues and conversations.
No, absolutely. I think you're right when you say that having that conversation is the win. And I would even go so far as to say that when you also see this as well, which is there are debates that you have where, like, at the beginning, you might have 30 votes for the proposition, which means that they agree with what's going on, or whatever the motion is. You might have 5 votes for the opposition, so they disagree. But by the end, it's 25-10. And so we've still lost. We haven't convinced the room, but we've gained 5 votes and they've lost. So we call it the swing. So you've won the swing. And so um, I've recently got drafted into. We had a few people that were sick in the last debate, so I had to step in quite last minute. And we did a debate on 2-tier policing in the UK, and I had to step in to say that there is 2-tier policing in the UK. That was the position I was given to defend. And even though at the start of the night, the team opposition had the most votes, and they still kept the most votes by the end, we had gained several votes. They had lost a few votes. And so, regardless of where you feel on the topic, that the ability to engage people, regardless of how, I think is really important. And that's also part of why you get people who are so aggressive about the idea of platforming people, because because they don't like you inherently because of the views you have with them, they'll go, even platforming them is giving them the win because it lets them be viewed by this people. And that's something that I think we do have to have real conversations about, which is like, when is platforming appropriate? Like, are there times where people maybe shouldn't be platformed? Is there cases when that's happened? I know a friend of mine was involved in the debate club within his university, and they were bringing on a speaker that in English media was quite positive, but actually in Arabic media was saying very, like, in the Arabic language, was saying very different things. And so they then had to make the decision to be like, actually, this person does not fit the values of what we're doing, because they present here, but we've now got their writings in a different language, and it goes against our ethos. So they asked them not to come, and that is a version of no platforming. But it's one that you can potentially stand behind. Depends on your personal position of the concept of a no platform.
True. Do you want to tell us a bit about Debate London and this community that you built?
Sure. Oh God, where to start? It's probably, and for me, I think it's probably one of the most exciting spaces that I've ever been in, because there's so many people. And I mean like different people, not just like the number of them. We get people from every political spectrum, from every kind of sexuality, gender, religion, every kind of value set you could think. We get people that are neurodiverse, and so they're coming at like the same ideas from completely different areas, and watching them kind of come together and talk about a lot of the issues that we'll focus on, because we try to focus on things that are topical, like what are people talking about in London, what people are talking about in the UK, what's happening around the world, and watching them come from like so many different like points of view on the same subject. And even when they like really ardently disagree, and you'll see 2 people absolutely going at it, they're like, I disagree with you, this is what I think. Then they'll go and grab a Coke and chill, but they're still friends. And it's that space where everyone knows, even if I disagree with you, you're going to listen to me, and I'm going to listen to you, and like you will be seen and heard. And I think from the debate perspective, that's really important. The other thing that really stands out to me is that everyone who comes often has like an understanding that they want to get better. And so like a lot of them will come to our workshops, they'll want to speak in the actual debates that we put on as well. And so they're also kind of like really, either whether by osmosis or by actively participating, like I'm watching like just so many people develop into really good, really effective speakers. We're doing a social in September as like a fun venue launch for a new venue partner we're working with called BAM Karaoke, and we're doing like a conspiracy night. So it's like just really fun conspiracies, and we're like gonna have a bit of fun with it. Things like are we in the Matrix? Stuff like that. And
Yeah.
the but like we've got someone who I think this might be their third or fourth debate, kind of giving that a go, and it's a completely different type of night where it's not just about being like, oh, I'm going to make an argument. I'm going to be funny. I'm going to like, and they're already getting involved in something that we would normally do as like just coaches, because look, they've progressed. And seeing things like that, I think is really good. We've also spawned a lot of other communities out of Debate London. So one of the latest, there's been a new venture into debate space in London, which was started by one of our members. There's become now, it's not quite a poetry night. I think it's just like an ideas night. So they get poets, they get game designers, movie writers, like script writers that would turn up and just like share their content, called Echo Chamber, which one of our members, Michael, also called Michael, created. And that's been going now every month since. Like we get a lot of really creative people that come along. And I'm also now working with one of our members called Zach, who actually debated against Douglas Murray at the Cambridge Union a few years ago. And I'm starting something called the Kalam Project with him, which is taking a lot of this debate space stuff into the Muslim community and actively engaging them in the development side, in kind of getting them involved in debate spaces, just to really kind of build that community around like discussion and dialogue, but also getting where he sees the community that he thinks needs more help in how do they face the world, how do they kind of have those conversations internally and externally about their values, and how do they share their values in an effective way. So I think it's been really interesting, not just for the development, but just like the amount of communities that have spawned off the back of people going, oh, this exists, I could do that too. And then I've worked with them, and it's just kind of just grown.
That's amazing. I think we need more of these sort of spaces in society. You've also worked with a lot of organizations such as schools and businesses, and even Harrow School and École de Guerre. What does debate offer in leadership and professional environments?
Oh God, so much. So there's a bunch of things that it provides. So you get just like the more esoteric end, you get the ability to think critically and like lay that case, but also in an accountable way. So if many decision makers can make decisions, and they can make those decisions from like information they've got, there might be a gut feeling, but if they're going to be accountable, they have to be able to explain those decisions. There's a reason why our judges like write articles and like papers after they make decisions to show their thought process. And for a lot of like senior leaders, what we've offered them is the ability to think more critically, to make better decisions, but also then to be able to justify those decisions in a really clear way to their peers, which for the most part just brings them on board in the same way we talked about earlier, which is like the idea of collaborative debating. If I can show you that I'm right and bring you with me, like that's a big win. But also it shows everyone that like they follow the logic that you've gone through, and then they buy in fundamentally. So you get that. You also then just get clarity because on how you present to people. So this is a lot of the work that we do with the École de Guerre. So it's the French military college. So it's when you're about midway through your military career, many soldiers can get brought into this. It's like a university, and they have a lot of curriculum. And we work with the English department because when many soldiers might go into multinational ready rooms for like decision making or like joint operations, sometimes it could just even be when they go back to their own local forces. So they might have like police officers or firemen. I believe I worked with a fireman that was there once. Like they're managing internally, they want to persuade the people in the room that their decisions are the correct ones. So in the case of like international joint operations, they're dealing with British and American troops, and they want to be taken seriously, and they want their positions to be really considered and potentially followed through with as the people that are leading the discussion, and arming them with the ability to communicate in a way that is culturally relevant, that is impactful, that is persuasive, and is also structured in a way that culturally fits the way that the British and the Americans listen to. Because in the French, is that the French style of debating and like presenting a case is very different to the British style, is very different to the American style. And so we can help them blend through all of those. Even then, you go down to the lower level, which is just pure confidence. So we'll get individuals where we help them with management training so that they can communicate better with their peers, that they can lead on meetings, and include more people and be more confident with that, with inviting people to speak, taking control of the room. And finally, for many people that are looking to kind of improve their careers, we do a lot of work around like interview training, kind of pay discussions, kind of asking for promotions, but also then just broader leadership skills around like how do you listen and summarize and make your case? How do you present that your case is the best one? I know, appreciate I'm probably repeating a few things at those different levels because I think it's a lot of it carries through the whole scope. But I think you use them slightly differently at different levels, but the skills are fundamentally the same. And what is interesting though, and this is a saying that I wouldn't normally touch on, but I saw an article on this yesterday. Is that so? We're actually a majority female club in terms of our like membership and our people that are coming along, and um, and with our private coaching, when we do more career stuff, we'll obviously get a mix of men and women. But what's interesting is even when both are taught the same thing, so both are taught like mechanistically, here's how we go through this process. Um, there there is a difference in what they needed to go and achieve the outcome. So for men, we find that tends to be as a generally speaking, it can be a lot more about the mechanism. Here's the way of asking for the thing. Here's how you go about doing that. Crack on. Whereas I found with a lot of our female cohorts, they're already really good and they can actually really know how to say it. They're kind of just often looking for the confidence to say it. So, and a lot of our work then ends up becoming you're good, like affirming them, giving them the confidence to just go for it, and then kind of getting the rewards off the back of that. So I think confidence plays a big part of that as well.
Oh, undoubtedly, confidence does, and I've often encouraged women as well to speak up sometimes because there's some really talented women out there, and they don't always speak up as much as they should. Okay, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be better at talking with people whose worldview is different from their own?
Give people grace. The odds are the person you're talking to does not want to see the world burn. Um, and if you try to understand the values that they're coming from, and you try to, and what are they prioritizing, it makes the conversation a lot easier. So that's why I quite like summarizing. If you find yourself getting particularly annoyed or like, oh, I can't believe they're saying this, or I'm struggling hearing this because I don't agree with it. If you can summarize what they've said, it forces you to listen to what they're actually saying as opposed to a version of what you have in your head that is getting you annoyed. It lets them know that you're genuinely listening to them, and then you can engage them at a very human level and say, what you've like, this is what I've understood. Okay, great. I don't agree. And actually, here's why I don't agree. And then explain that. And again, if you do that slowly, you can do it quite calmly. But that summary also just takes a lot of the initial emotion out of it. So yeah, give people grace, and also just take the time to make sure that you're dealing with the person in front of you and not an idea of them that you have in your head because they're saying things that someone else that maybe looked like them or sounds like them has said. Because that's something that happens quite a lot, and that just leads to an ever escalating. They get a bit annoyed, I get a bit annoyed. They get a bit annoyed, I get a bit annoyed, and then we're shouting at each other and throwing
People make
things.
this assumption, don't they? If someone comes from a particular political party or particular religion or some of the ideology, that you believe this. They haven't asked them what they believe. They haven't listened to what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And even within, any of these political parties or with any religious or other community, you're going to find an entire spectrum of
Yeah.
views. It may be within parameters, but there will be a spectrum of views there. And unless you know where they fit on that spectrum, and you won't know unless you give them chance to actually speak for themselves and you listen to them.
Yeah. And also, all issues are individual. So even if like it covers maybe the same set of values, so you might broadly think where they're going to sit. That issue might be an individual thing for them. So they may be thinking about this because they might have had a particular experience or a lived experience, or They might have been convinced of this on this particular case we should act with a different priority. So it's part of why it is important to listen.
Excellent. Yeah. With yourself, has debating made you more certain or less certain about your own beliefs, or given you more clarity?
Oh God, I think it's made me seem more certain. I'm probably much more able to convey what I believe with like a real clear conviction. But I think there are a lot of things I'm just definitely open into questioning. One of our coaches, his name is Surya. We disagree on basically everything. It's always good fun. But he always has a way of explaining things like I really respect how he approaches things, and we'll kind of talk through the issue. And I often leave it kind of going, maybe I'm annoyed because because of the way we disagree sometimes can get a bit heated, but I often leave it kind of going, I understand where he's coming from. And actually, that is a really good point. Like, and it does pull me into this idea of going, am I completely certain? And I think it definitely enables me to question myself more and more openly. But I'm also very lucky that I've got people around me that I can trust. And so I'm oftentimes not disagreeing with someone like on the street or like someone I've never met before. That can happen. It's people that I trust, and I know that they're coming at this from a genuine place. They're genuine beliefs. They're good people, and I can trust that when we disagree, they're disagreeing because it's what they think is a positive outcome. And that is also very important, which is when you have people around you that you disagree with, is some people, unfortunately, are disagreeing for the wrong reasons. And some people are maybe agreeing with you for the wrong reasons. And so do also, yeah, do kind of think, who can I trust this person? That is a question. Don't ask it all the time. That'll make you very paranoid. But every now and then, feel free to ask a question. What do you think about this? And just see what they say, especially if it's something that you agree with. Just see why they agree with you. It's good fun.
I would also say it's very healthy as well, because none of us have all the answers, and anybody who claims they do is a liar. And
Mm.
so it's like, how are we going to learn if we don't listen to other people, if we don't engage in debates or discussion with them, and genuinely engage with that process? That's how we learn. Okay. Finally, if you could change one thing about how we conduct public debate today, what would it be?
Ooh. I think I'd end the jeering.
Hmm.
Um, the yeah, I think like the gut wrench reaction of just like labeling something as like a to be offensive to try to put someone down. It's a bit like when you open an article and you can tell if it's going to be a hit piece or not by like how attractive the picture is. Like they'll use a really ugly picture if they want to like tear the person apart, and I kind of like things like that just prime people to react emotionally or negatively. Whereas it means you're no longer dealing with like what have they actually said. You're trying to deal with them. I think that's just not healthy. Sells a lot of stuff, but it's just not a healthy way to have like legitimate discourse.
You might have to train the House of Commons then, like literally all of them.
Yeah, but they're all twats. No, no, but yeah, I don't think so. In PMQs, like that's part of the tradition, and I don't agree with
Oh.
it, but it is very tongue in cheek. But I do think when you have
No,
more
that's
time,
exactly when you mentioned during, that's exactly what I
yeah,
was thinking of, because it doesn't matter what anyone says on either side, there'll be this massive amount of jeering. Right? I guess it is part of the tradition.
yeah, but that's because they don't have time. So, like, if I had to change PMQs, I'd be like, actually, I think they should have to take more legitimate time to answer questions. Like, if they get given a question, they should have to more legitimately answer it. Um, oh, actually, if I could change one thing, I would abolish deflections. Answer bloody questions. Actually, answer the question you've been asked. Like, is it a yes or a no? Say yes or no, and just take the consequences that people might not like you afterwards, but answer the question. Um, yeah,
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us today on In Conversation. It's been a real pleasure, and I've benefited as much from listening to you as So thank you. I've really learned a lot as well, and thank you to all our viewers who have tuned in. And I look forward to seeing you next time. If
thank you
if
for
you
having me.
find these yeah, to our viewers, if you find these podcasts useful, please do consider liking and subscribing and share with whoever may benefit from them. And I also have a buy me a coffee link, which you can actually sponsor, which will help me to do more of this and to improve my content. So until next time, good night, and thank you.